Does anyone remember Ewan and Charlie from Long Way Down? Those opening scenes where they kept dropping their big R1150 GSs? I think a lot of us think about that when we think about these adventure bikes nowadays. And the question is, are adventure bikes just getting too heavy, or were they too heavy to begin with? Let's take a deep dive on this and figure this out. There's a lot of talk out there about the weight of motorcycles nowadays, especially adventure bikes. And as people start to use these adventure bikes off-road and go into remote places, sometimes by themselves, are these bikes just getting too heavy? So what we're going to do today is take a look at the weight of these adventure bikes compared to dual sport bikes and have an honest discussion about when is something too heavy and what are some criteria you should use to figure out if a bike is too heavy for you or not. So the first part of this video is going to be looking at the weight of some adventure bikes compared to dual sport bikes and seeing what the difference actually is. So what I've done here is I've chosen a few adventure bikes and a few dual sport bikes. I'm going to put the weight up here on the screen and we're going to have a discussion about this. So the adventure bikes I've chosen to look at are the R1250 GS, the adventure model, not the standard model, the Honda Africa Twin, the KTM 790 Adventure R. And then for the dual sport bikes, I thought we would look at the DR650, the KTM 690R, the Honda CRF 450L, and then the KTM 500 EXC. So these are all very respected bikes in their respective categories. So let's look at how the weights stack up here. So one thing that's immediately striking is the R1250 GS Adventure at almost 600 pounds is more than twice the weight of the 500 EXC. So literally it weighs twice what that bike does. And then for the other adventure bikes, you can see the Africa Twin weighs 501 pounds. Again, that's the standard version with the manual transmission. So that's a good bit less than the GS, but it's still twice the weight of the 500 EXC. Now let's look at one of the lighter adventure bikes that's come out recently, which is the 790R. The 790 is getting a ton of good press, and probably for good reason. I think it's probably a great bike, but it's still 469 pounds. Okay, so that is 100 pounds heavier than a DR650, and it's over 200 pounds heavier than their own 500 EXC. All right, now going down the list, if you go down to a KTM 690, that's 320 pounds. The CRF 450L, which is finally Japan gave us a good performance dual sport, that's still 290 pounds. And then of course our lightweight champion, 258 pounds for the 500 EXC. Now keep in mind, these are all wet weights, so these are fully fueled up. So when you add luggage and 10 sets of fog lights and all sorts of things to your adventure bike or dual sport, yeah, these weights are going to go up. But we have to compare them, sort of the naked bikes with fuel to get an apples-to-apples comparison. I know your bikes are actually going to be heavier when you go ride them, but we have to use something for the specs. So it's kind of obvious that an adventure bike is a compromise, and you're compromising with a heavier weight in order to have a bike that is better for long distance travel. It's better on the freeway, it's more comfortable, it has more wind protection, it probably has things like cruise control, it may even have shaft drive in the case of a GS, it has luggage mounts, it has adjustable windshields, all those kinds of things that add weight and complexity but make for a much better touring bike but take away from the lightweight and from the off-road ability. So weight is really a problem in two ways, okay? I think it's a problem for ride feel and handling, how does the bike actually feel, but it's also a problem for picking your bike up or getting it out of a sticky situation when you've got it stuck, maybe you've ridden off a ledge, maybe you've gotten stuck in the mud, stuck in the ice, or whatever it might be. So using my GS, for instance, as an example, most of the time I'm riding it around, it doesn't feel that heavy, I'm having a good time, I can ride it on fire roads, I can take it on Jeep roads okay, and it's not too big of a problem. But when it does become a problem, and it becomes a big problem very quickly, is either if I drop it or get it stuck. And if I'm by myself, that's a lot of weight to be dealing with, to be picking up or trying to drag out of a ditch. So the weight is not a problem until it is. So how do we know when weight is a problem? I think there's three areas we can break this down in, right? There's rider experience, there's rider strength and fitness, and then there's where and how you ride your motorcycle. So let's talk about rider experience. Why does this matter? So if you're a newer rider and you don't have as much experience off-road, or maybe you're new to riding in general, you're probably going to drop your motorcycle a lot more. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. That's okay. That's just learning. But if you're dropping it more, you're having to pick it up more, and that's going to really sap your energy very quickly. So if you're a newer rider, you really have to pay attention to the weight of your bike, especially if you're going to be taking it off-road. A long time ago, we all used to learn to ride on dirt bikes, but now I see people buying their first or second bike as an adventure bike at 500 pounds or whatever it is, and that's a real concern, because if you're new and you're dealing with that much weight and trying to learn off-road, you might get discouraged and just quit the sport altogether. So it's something to think about. So rider strength and fitness. So obviously if you're a bodybuilder and you have good cardio and good aerobic, and you can lift your 500 or 600 pound bike 5 or 10 times in a row, and it's not a big deal for you, then that's great. Then enjoy your big motorcycle and don't worry about it. So this really has to do with your physical size and physical strength. Some people do weight training exercises and some people don't, and that's going to affect this. So if you're smaller or you're not as strong or you have maybe underlying physical issues that you're dealing with, you really have to be more careful with this and think about, can you handle the weight of your bike? My advice on this is just simply go and practice lifting up your motorcycle. See if you can lift it when it's maybe off camber, not totally level, or if it's more downhill. Also think about, do you have your luggage and your tools and everything packed on your motorcycle when you're lifting it? So when you practice, make sure it's the actual weight that the bike is going to be when you're out riding it on your trip. So where and how you ride is a big factor, right? So we say off-road riding, but what does that really mean? People have different definitions of that, and it's a moving target. So some people say off-road, and they literally mean like single tracks and goat trails and technical riding. Other people say off-road, and what they mean is just off pavement, which is a dirt road or a gravel road, right? Where these big adventure bikes are fine on those conditions, but they're not really fine in the technical off-roading. So it depends on what kind of rider you are. If you're a well-rounded rider and you like all sorts of riding like I do, then basically you're probably going to have more than one motorcycle at the end of the day. The more technical the riding is, the more you're going to fall, and the more you're going to have to pick your bike up, and so weight is going to become more of an issue. So the second part to this is how you ride. So, and I don't just mean if you ride fast or slow or kind of your style, but really what I'm saying is, do you ride mostly in groups, or do you ride mostly by yourself? For me, riding is kind of an escape from my normal life, my everyday life, so I do a lot of it by myself and I enjoy that, but I'm fully aware of the risk I'm taking when I do that. And what I mean is that if I'm out there on a trail somewhere by myself and I drop my motorcycle or get it stuck, if it's too heavy for me to deal with, then I really have a problem. I don't want to be thinking about pushing my spot beacon just because I got my bike stuck or I can't lift it. That's not a good use of the spot service or whatever EPIRB service you have. So in this case, having a heavy motorcycle might prohibit you from riding in areas that you really want to go ride. And if it is, you really need to think about that and consider maybe if you should be riding a lighter weight bike. Adventure motorcycles are a compromise by their design. We've talked about this in other videos. Like I said, they're designed to travel somewhere and then still be able to ride some trails, depending on your abilities. They're always going to be that jack of all trades and master of none. I mean, that's what the KLR was, right, for so many years. If you're comparing an adventure bike to a dual sport bike, we're going to have another video on how do you choose. Should you get an adventure bike or should you get a dual sport bike? And of course, it's going to really have to do with the kind of ride you plan to do with it. Do you plan to really travel long distance, or are you more focused on riding off-road locally, and are you willing to trailer or truck your bike to the trails? So when we're thinking about whether our motorcycle is too heavy or not, we need to think about all the factors that I mentioned above. Everyone is going to be different. Every riding situation is different. People have different abilities. And so you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. But here's my tips. So if you're thinking of getting a lighter motorcycle because you're worried about the weight of yours or you're having a hard time lifting it, then that's fine. But you have to remember that with everything comes a compromise. So if you buy a lighter motorcycle, you're probably going to compromise some sort of street capability, whether it's not being as comfortable, not having as much wind protection, not having certain features that you care about, and just not being as good for highway travel. So it's probably going to have a compromise. On the other side, if you're thinking about getting a larger adventure bike because you're doing more long trips, maybe you're going camping a lot, maybe you're riding on the freeways a lot and you need to be able to cruise at 80 miles an hour, then just realize that if you're going to that heavier bike, you're going to compromise some of your off-road ability. you may be able to ride the bike off-road, and if you're a skilled rider, you may be able to keep up with your buddies on their small bikes. But if you start getting stuck or crashing or something like that, you're really going to have a problem. So trying to make conclusions here, I would never advocate or suggest riding a bike that you can't pick up by yourself with your luggage on it, right? And you need to be able to pick it up a few times in a row, because if you're in mud or ice or snow, that's what's going to be happening. You need to be prepared for that. So the first thing I would say is learn proper lifting techniques for your motorcycle. So there's a lot of videos out there, and maybe I'll get around to doing one too, but there's a way to lift your motorcycle without injuring yourself, and a way to use your legs to lift, right? The second thing is consider doing some training. So consider strength training. If you have certain weaknesses in your body, consider about going to the gym or building a home gym, and work on your aerobic capacity too, because that's something that a lot of us struggle with as we get into middle age. Secondly, consider the stuff that you carry with you. Can you make your motorcycle lighter? Do you have extra tools that you never use? Do you have camping gear that honestly you probably don't need? Do you have extra parts and things on your bike that really aren't serving a purpose? Are you carrying an extra Rotopacks full of fuel, a fuel can or whatever, just because you think you might need it? I mean, think about these things. They really do add up in the weight. For me, I always travel as light as possible when I ride. I always strip it down to, what do I really need for this ride, because I don't like to have the extra weight. So for me personally, I tend to know that somewhere around that 500-pound mark is kind of my safety margin, in that range. I mean, it can depend on different factors, but if it's over 500 pounds, I start to have an issue with lifting it repeatedly and dealing with that motorcycle. So for me, that kind of puts out of consideration some of the larger bikes. I do ride a GS. I've had a lot of adventure bikes, if you guys have watched my videos. But when I ride my GS, I really am having to hold back a lot on where I go and how I ride, because I know that if I get into a shitty situation, I'm going to spend all my energy trying to deal with the weight of that motorcycle. So be honest with yourself and consider what compromises that you're willing to make as a rider and for the riding you like to do. So are you more of an off-road rider? Then you can probably compromise some of the highway comforts and go with a dual sport bike or a dirt bike, an EXC or a DR650 or a DRZ or whatever it is. But if you're more of a road-oriented person, you like those long trips, you need to go on the freeway all day, and you like the twin-cylinder or the multi-cylinder bikes, then just know that you're going to be dealing with a heavier machine, and you better be prepared to deal with it when gravity takes into effect. So until next time, ride safe out there, and we'll see you soon. Hello, what? Who is this? The stock market crashed. I told you, buy low and sell high. I gotta make my GS payment over here. I gotta buy coffee, I gotta buy more fog lights for my bike. People would just subscribe to my channel and like my videos. Maybe I'd actually make some money off this thing. Well, you know what? You're fired.